So for the animation controls, all I'm going to use is some shapes. And I'll start with the main control for the full car itself. And so what I'm going to do is come over to my create panel, move along to the shapes tab, or the little button, and I'm going to create a rectangle, and that's going to encompass the full car. So let me just drag this out on the floor. I'm not really worrying about the size or position just now. And I'm going to right click just to end the tool, press W, which is my select and move tool, and just right click these spinners so that the controller goes back to world space 000. So I'm going to hit my T key and go to a top viewport and hit F3 so that I can have a wireframe. And I'm going to hit G so that we don't have to see this this grid that's going to put me off a little bit. And in the modify panel, I can change the size of this. So let's do this now. I'm just going to click and drag this up and see how much I need to go. So maybe 390. That looks alright. And I need a width on this as well, so let's pull this out a bit more. And maybe 170. So that looks good. Let's just have a quick look in the perspective viewport by pressing P, hitting F3 just so that we can see the geometry again, and taking a look at this control. And that looks like a pretty nicely placed controller already. I'm also going to turn on the corner radius, and let's just dial this up, and you can see the very corners of this, which was a rectangle, is just going to get beveled a little bit, which is going to look really nice. And let's make that 50, and that really sort of outlines our car, which for me really shows that, you know, this is going to be the main control for the car. And I want to turn on rendering in the viewport, so under the rendering tab, just click enable in viewport, and we can see that this is now enabled, and it's a bit easier to select and see. I'm just going to change the sides down to 3, and I'm going to come down to the interpolation panel and turn this down to 3 on the steps as well. That makes it a little bit more rough around here, but it means that it keeps the scene nice and clean and nice and quick. So that's the main control. So the next thing, the main thing about a car is being able to control the direction of where the wheels are pointing and to be able to steer it. So I'm just going to turn my geometry off for a second. So coming over to the display tab and clicking geometry, and I'm going to create a new point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the center of the two wheel controls, the wheel rotation controls or locators. So in the create panel, cross to helpers and point, and just click point in the scene, and right click just to end the tool. I'm not going to bother renaming this because it's going to get deleted out pretty soon anyway. What I am going to do is put on a position constraint between these two to get the very center point. So I'm going to go to animation constraints, position constraint, and I'm just going to click this wheel over here, and let's scroll this down a little bit, and I'm going to add a position target over here as well. And with that done, that's the very center of these, so wherever these move to, that would stay in the very center point. I just find that really easy to find where the center of something is, of two objects. And with that done, we can create a control for the steering of the car. And I actually want an arrow for that, so jumping into my top viewport by pressing T, I'm going to press G just to turn on the grid for a second, and go back to my create menu, make sure I'm on the shapes button, and hit the line tool. And let's just zoom into the grid a tiny bit. With that done, I want to turn on snaps to the grid points, so just right click the snaps toggle at the top of the screen, make sure grid points is on, which it is. Let's turn that on. And let's make an arrow. So I'm just going to click here. I'm just eyeballing this as well, not really worrying too much about it. This looks pretty good so far. And once we make the arrow and we click the first point that we started with, it's going to ask us if we want to close it, and I do. And let's just turn off that snap toggle, turn off the grid again, go back to a perspective viewport. And I haven't worried about the size too much. We'll fix that in a minute. I'm going to press Shift and A. That's going to turn on my quick snapping and our quick align, and I'm just going to align it to the point that we created. And with that done, I'm just going to move it down to 0 on the Z so that it's on the floor with this guy. So. And actually, before we do that, just undo that one. And let's just move this arrow forward a bit. And I'm just going to go back to my press T and go to my top viewport. And I'm just going to eyeball this into position. This is probably the most fun bit that you can have with rigging, because it's all about what you want from the controls, what you think the animators are going to like, or if they've told you what they want as well, that's even better. Because I'll be animating this car, I know exactly what I need from it, so I'm just having a bit of fun placing these around. So with this done, you can see that the pivot position isn't where I really want it to be, which is way back here where this cross is. So I'm going to just go to my hierarchy tab, affect the pivot only. I'm going to hit Shift and A for the align, and I'm just going to align it back to this point, and then turn off that affect pivot. And now I'm going to move this down in the Z-axis to 0. Perfect. So that's exactly what I was needing. This arrow is obviously way too big. If we come back to the display tab and turn on the geometry so we can see it, it just looks a bit crazy. So with that done, I'm not going to scale this. Scaling it will mean that the width of this controller is actually going to change. So the way that we can get around this is just select the controller, go to the modify panel. On the modifier list, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, it's not going to fit on my screen, unfortunately, but right at the bottom is the X-form modifier. Just attach that, as you can see, and then on the gizmo we should be able to scale this any way we want, and you can see that the line thickness stays the same. So I can have whatever I need for this, and just make that a bit thinner. And that's going to be my steering control. So with that done, I'm pretty pleased with that overall. I'm going to leave this X-form on just for the moment until I've finished all of the other controls, and that looks pretty good to me. Alright, let's just move that out, that selection off. So that looks pretty good. So another thing that we need in as well is for that second video that we looked at, all of the drifting. We want to be able to drift this car if we need it. And I'm just going to create a control circle. So in the shapes tab again, just make a circle. Just right click to end the tool. I'm going to just remove that geometry just for a second because I don't want to see it. So in my display tab, I've just hit the geometry. Shift and A again just to align it to the point that I created. Turn back on the geometry, and I'm just going to move this up above the hood of the car. And I can actually change the size as well, so moving to the modifier panel, let's change this out to 50, looks way too big, 25 is probably a bit better. And that's going to be my control that can swing the car out if it's going to be sliding all over the place. So the other thing that we talked about is the actual roll of the car, and I'm going to use another circle control for that. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and move this across up to just above where the driver would sit, and I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to change the size of this as well down to maybe 10, and I want to show where I'm going to limit this. So we talked about, you know, limiting the controller so that there's not too much roll and lean for this car. So I'm going to create back in my create tab, I'm going to go back to shapes, create another rectangle, and just right click to end that once I've created it. I'm going to hit Shift and A just to align it to this circle that we've put above the driver's cabin. Actually, I'm going to move both of those back a little bit. And with the rectangle selected, I'm just going to go in and change the length, maybe to 75, and the width to 75 as well. I'm going to leave the corner radius at nothing. I don't want it to be nicely rounded like this. I want this to be pretty sharp. And that looks good. So that's going to limit the amount that this controller, once we set it up, can only go to these points. And this is going to control the roll of the car. So in the next video, we'll go in and we'll start renaming this so that we've got a naming convention, and we'll start looking at the wheels and tires as well.